The price of easy, a billionaire's regret, and the secret that doubled. If you've ever chosen the path of least resistance, get ready. This is what happens when easy costs you everything. 3 years ago, CEO Arthur Vance walked away from the woman he loved for her simpler best friend. He called her too complicated. Today, he walked into a hotel lobby and saw 2 little girls with his eyes. The sight of his past, and his hidden future, is why this video has gone viral. You won't believe what he did next. Subscribe right now. Hit the like button and leave a comment telling us, what do you think is the true cost of choosing convenience over connection? Chapter 1. The Quiet Collapse. The London penthouse. The office was a monument to quiet, expensive power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a cold, sweeping view of the London skyline, and the sound-dampening glass made the faint tick of a designer clock on the wall seem louder than ever. Amelia Beaumont stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Her dark mahogany hair was smoothed back into a sharp, professional ponytail, her hazel eyes steady, though her heart was hammering a painful rhythm against her ribs. She hadn't expected a confession. Not like this. Not delivered so casually, as if he were discussing quarterly figures and not demolishing the 6 years of life they had built together. Arthur Vance had his back half turned to her, his hand resting on the sleek mahogany desk. His jaw was tight, his ice-blue eyes fixed on a point far beyond the city horizon. Looking at her would have made the truth too real. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost soft, which somehow made the words feel 10 times sharper. It's easier with Scarlett. The words didn't echo. They landed flat, heavy and definitive. Amelia blinked once, then twice, not in disbelief, but in a slow, chilling recognition of something she had felt creeping into their expensive Chelsea home for months. It wasn't the kind of shock that makes the world shake. It was the silent collapse of something that had been cracking for a long time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She didn't ask why. She just looked at him. The man she had loved so deeply, she once believed his name was written into her future. His hair was slightly longer than usual, falling across his forehead in a way she used to smooth with her fingers. His expression was carefully composed, the way someone looks when they have convinced themselves that logic justifies the pain. He thought he was being honest. He thought honesty was enough. "It's easier with her," he repeated, softer this time, as if saying it with less force could make it sound less cruel. There was a flicker in his expression when he finally turned to face her. It wasn't guilt. Guilt would have been a mercy. It was relief. Relief, because he had chosen what he believed would simplify his life. He confused depth with difficulty, devotion with heaviness, and her quiet strength with something that demanded too much from him. Amelia inhaled slowly, her chest tight, but her back ramrod straight. She had spent months noticing the messages he answered too quickly, the late meetings that weren't meetings, the careful evasion whenever she mentioned Scarlett's name. She had tried to ignore it, because love sometimes breeds patience to the point of self-harm. But now, there was no more room to pretend. She spoke, but her voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet, measured. The voice of someone walking out of a burning building who refuses to carry the smoke with them. "Then go," she said. Not a command, a release. His jaw clenched, as if he hadn't expected her to make it so effortless. Perhaps he had envisioned tears, pleas, and desperation. Maybe he had wanted to feel desired on his way out. But Amelia had already learned something he hadn't. Sometimes, dignity is the only thing you can save when someone chooses to leave. She turned and picked up her tailored tote bag from the chair, her movements calm, practiced, as if she had rehearsed this in her mind long before this moment. Arthur didn't move. He didn't try to stop her. He watched her walk to the door with the same distance he had shown her for months. And as she reached for the handle, she paused only once, not to look back, but to take a breath, to steady herself, to reclaim her own name from any version of herself that had been molded around him. She didn't say goodbye. As the elevator doors closed behind her and the opulent lobby opened before her, the outside world felt too bright, too loud, too real. The city moved as if nothing in her life had changed. People talked, laughed, and rushed. She walked forward, one step, then another, because stopping would mean breaking, and she refused to break for someone who had chosen the easy way over the real thing. It was only when she reached the cool, open air that she placed a hand on her abdomen, where a life, two lives, were quietly, secretly, beautifully beginning to grow. She hadn't planned to tell him yet. She had been waiting for the right moment, the right piece. Now, she understood. The right moment would never have existed. He had left before he even knew. But she, for the first time in a long time, felt the faint spark of a future that was only hers. Chapter 2. The Aegean Exile and the Doubled Secret. Amelia didn't just leave. She executed a slow, careful withdrawal. London, once feeling like home, now seemed noisy and intrusive, filled with reminders of conversations, late dinners, bitter-tasting laughter, and dreams she had once tethered to a man who chose convenience over love. She packed her belongings alone, folding clothes into boxes, not with anger, but with a quiet numbness, like someone tending to a wound that hasn't started bleeding yet. She told no one where she was going, not co-workers, not mutual acquaintances, not even family at first. Silence became her shield. The travel was unpleasant. Morning sickness arrived in unpredictable waves, and exhaustion settled deep in her bones. But she kept moving. She looked at maps for places where the sea wasn't crowded with tourists, and the air was soft. She finally found a tiny coastal village in Crete, a spot that barely made it into travel guides. It had narrow streets lined with blooming jasmine, a bakery that opened before dawn, and houses with peeling paint and windows that overlooked an endless blue sea. It was quiet enough to breathe again. She rented a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of the village. It wasn't perfect. The wallpaper was peeling in the hall, and the floorboards creaked loudly at night, but the windows opened to the sound of the waves, and the mornings were brightened by a soft light that made everything feel like a beginning. Amelia knew she couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Her savings were limited, her income uncertain. She took a part-time job at a local bookshop, shelving books, writing inventory by hand, and sweeping the floors at closing. The pay was modest, but the place was warm, filled with people who spoke in low voices and asked no questions. The pregnancy changed her silently at first. She would pause on her walk home, placing her hand over her belly, feeling something move inside her, a reminder that this journey was not just hers. Fear came, of course, fear of raising a child unsupported, fear of the nights when exhaustion would be stronger than patience, fear of sickness, of mistakes, of how to answer when someone asked about the father. But with time, fear began to share space with something else. When the doctor told her there were 2 heartbeats, she didn't speak for a long moment. The world seemed to tilt. Her chest tightened, and tears came from a deep, wordless place. 2 lives, 2 futures, 2 pieces of her, and him, growing inside her. She thought she would feel overwhelmed or trapped, but what she felt was something firmer, quieter, a kind of sacred responsibility. She prepared the cottage herself. She bought a second-hand crib and painted it white. Then she found an identical one at a thrift store across the village. Slightly worn, but still strong. She washed the baby clothes with lavender soap, hung them outside to dry in the salt air, and watched them swing like tiny flags in the sunlight. The locals noticed her eventually, not with gossip, but with gentle curiosity. An elderly woman named Kyria Elpida often showed up with baskets of fresh bread or soup, saying only, "You shouldn't be cooking when you look so tired," and disappearing before Amelia could refuse. There were nights when the loneliness pressed hard against her ribs, nights when she lay awake listening to the sea and wondered if Arthur ever thought of her, if he missed her laugh, if he realized what he had thrown away. But she learned not to dwell on those thoughts. He had chosen his path. Now she was choosing hers. The day she gave birth, the ocean was calm. It was hard, painful, and overwhelming. She cried, not from fear, but from the sheer force of bringing life into the world. When the babies were placed in her arms, tiny and warm, both with dark hair and bright, astonishingly blue eyes, she felt something inside her unclench, something that had been tense since the day she stood in that office. She named them Lyra and Eleni. Lyra, for the openness she wanted her daughter to always feel inside herself. Eleni for the wisdom, the sweetness, the strength that doesn't need to roar to be real. The first months were exhausting in ways she couldn't have imagined. 2 babies meant 2 cries, 2 needs, 2 bodies pressed against her chest at all hours. She barely slept. She often cried silently while rocking them in the dim early morning light. But even in the hardest moments, when her arms shook from fatigue and her heart felt too stretched, she felt something else: gratitude. Every morning, she took them to the shore in a double stroller, the waves muffling the world around them. Tourists only saw a young mother with 2 beautiful babies. They didn't know the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the quiet triumph she carried with her. With every passing month, Amelia grew stronger. Her voice became firmer, her heart softer, yet also tougher where it needed to be. She didn't erase the past. She learned to live beyond it, and far away, in another city, Arthur lived a life that looked polished on the outside, but felt increasingly empty. He never knew why the silence felt heavier now, why certain sunsets ached in his chest, why he couldn't sleep some nights. The world was already slowly preparing the moment when their paths would cross again. But for now, Amelia simply held her daughters and watched the sea. Unaware of the storm and the healing that awaited her. Audience interaction. Amelia chose the name Eleni, which means light and wisdom, to reflect her strength. What quality do you think is most important for a single mother rebuilding her life? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like this video. Chapter 3. 3 years of reconstruction. Amelia built her life in small, steady layers. Every day became a routine she could cling to, something that kept her grounded. In the mornings, she woke before the sun, rising slowly not to disturb the warm little bodies snuggled against her. Lyra always slept curled near her chest, a tiny hand grasping her shirt, while Eleni sprawled out as if she owned the entire bed, messy curls and mouth slightly open. Amelia would watch them breathe first, letting that quiet moment remind her of why she was living. She learned to do everything at double speed: 2 breakfasts, 2 sets of clothes, 2 pairs of small shoes that somehow always disappeared into opposite corners of the house. She laughed more than she expected. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a small, soft laugh that lived in the corners of her mouth and the warmth of her chest. The kind of laughter she had never had before. The village began to recognize the 3 of them as a familiar sight. People smiled as the stroller passed, waved when Amelia and the girls sat outside the bakery with warm rolls that left crumbs on their small dresses. Lyra was the quieter one, cautious and observant, her blue eyes always studying everything around her. Eleni was bold, her laughter bright, her hands always reaching out, always curious. They balanced each other naturally, like two halves of the same beat. When they turned one, Kyria Elpida and a few neighbors gathered in the yard with candles and a homemade cake, singing while the wind played with the clothes on the line. Amelia held the girls in her lap, overwhelmed by a feeling of belonging she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the life she once imagined, but it was real. It was steady. It was filled with small joys she never knew she wanted. Time passed, and the girls began to grow into themselves. They learned to run on the sand, their tiny footprints erasing themselves behind them. They learned to say "Mama," first in shy whispers, then in cheerful shouts. Amelia's heart ached with joy every time. She told them stories at night of oceans, constellations, and brave girls who chose their own paths. She never mentioned him, but sometimes, in quiet moments, when she closed the shop, when she stood on the shore while the girls played, when she washed dishes under the warm hum of the kitchen light, Arthur would return to her thoughts, no longer with longing, but with a soft pang. She wondered if he was happy, if he thought of her at all, if he ever considered that love wasn't meant to be easy. She heard things through the distant thread of online acquaintances. He and Scarlett had lasted less than a year. There were rumors, arguments, blame, resentment. A child that didn't survive. Amelia didn't know the details, and she didn't look for them. The past was no longer her home. She had moved on. She had rooted herself in a place where no one knew who she had been, only who she was now. Yet, even as she rebuilt, a piece of the past remained embedded in the present, in two pairs of bright blue eyes that mirrored his. Sometimes she saw him in their giggles, in the slight tilt of Lyra's head, in Eleni's stubbornness. The girls didn't know. They only knew their mother loved them fiercely and infinitely. Still, there were moments, small and fleeting, when Amelia imagined what it would be like for them to have a father. Not the man he was when he left, but someone who could kneel in the sand and tie shoelaces, who could lift them to touch tree branches, who could teach them things she didn't know how to teach. The thought came not with bitterness, but with a quiet curiosity. 3 years passed like this, slow, steady, and healing. The girl's laughter filled her home. The sea became the soundtrack of her life. Amelia found a gentle peace she once believed she would never feel again. But life has a way of returning to that which we thought we had closed forever. It doesn't ask if we are ready. One warm summer afternoon, when the girls were a few months over 3 years old, the bookshop owner, Mr. Stavros, announced they needed help organizing a charity event at a hotel in the neighboring town, a fundraiser for children's art programs. Amelia agreed to help, thinking only of supporting the community that had so gently held her all these years. She didn't know that the hotel lobby she would soon step into, holding her daughter's tiny hands, would be the very place where Arthur Vance was standing, unaware that the life he once abandoned was about to walk directly into his line of sight. Not because fate was cruel, but because fate was precise. Chapter 4. The Encounter. 2 pairs of blue eyes. The hotel lobby in the nearby coastal town was filled with the warm murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melody of a piano played by a young musician near the entrance. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of the Aegean coast, and long, sheer curtains swayed gently whenever the doors opened to let in the summer breeze. Amelia walked slowly, one hand holding Lyra's, the other Eleni's. The girls were dressed in light summer dresses with small embroidered flowers, their dark hair tied up with matching blue ribbons. They moved with the innocent excitement of children discovering a new place, pausing to look at the grand chandelier or the fountain in the center of the lobby. Amelia kept her expression calm, but her heart was beating faster than usual. Crowds still unnerved her. Too many eyes meant too many potential questions. But the fundraiser was important to the community, and she had promised Mr. Stavros she would help. She adjusted the small bag on her shoulder and guided the girls toward the reception desk where the volunteers were meeting. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Arthur was talking to one of the event organizers, nodding politely, although his attention frequently drifted to the window, where the ocean shimmered in the late afternoon light. His life had become a cycle of meetings, obligations, and polite conversations that required long stretches of emotional neutrality. He had learned to appear present even when he felt strangely empty. He had gained everything he thought he wanted years ago: success, recognition, control. Yet beneath it all was a current of unrest he couldn't name. He had agreed to attend the charity event to support a business partner, expecting nothing more than speeches, donations, and another night of polite applause. He certainly didn't expect that the moment he turned toward the main staircase, his breath would catch in his chest. From across the room, he saw a woman kneel to adjust the ribbon in a small girl's hair. The movement was soft, familiar in a way that hit him before he could understand why. Her hair was dark brown and soft, falling around her shoulders as she bent close. Her posture, her hands, the way she spoke gently to the child, it all triggered a memory he hadn't allowed himself to go near for years. Amelia. The name formed in his mind not with shock, but with a deep, sudden pang, like a bruise unexpectedly pressed. He froze. He still couldn't see her face, only her back, and the two small girls standing beside her, one fidgeting with excitement, the other holding tight to her mother's dress. Something inside him tightened, a pull that was both instinctive and terrifying. Amelia stood up and turned. He saw her eyes, warm, deep, steady, and felt all the air leave his body. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch, but her expression changed almost imperceptibly. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise. It was the look of someone who has already survived the worst part of the story. But it was the girls who broke him. Two small girls. Twins. Both with dark hair and eyes as blue as the sky reflected over a calm ocean. Eyes that matched his own. Eyes he had seen in the mirror every morning of his life. They looked up at him with curiosity, innocent and unprotected, unaware of what their existence meant to the man standing mere steps away. His heart was no longer steady. It slammed against his ribs, every beat resounding with a realization that hit deeper than anything he had ever felt. He took a single step forward, then another. Slowly, as if the ground beneath him might break if he moved too fast. The noise of the lobby softened to nothing. The room seemed to shrink until there were only 4 people in it: himself, Amelia, and the 2 little girls who were clearly his daughters. When he spoke, his voice was fractured, as if it had traveled a long way to reach the surface. Amelia. She didn't speak right away. Her hand curved protectively around Lyra. She watched him carefully, steady and grounded. Eleni blinked at him, tilting her head with curious innocence. He swallowed hard, his eyes going to the girls again. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked with disbelief and the pain that arrived 3 years too late. "Are they?" Amelia nodded once, a small, quiet gesture. "Yes." There was no accusation in her tone, no explanation, no anger, just the truth. Something inside him shattered, not just from pain, but from recognition. The world he had built, every choice he had justified, every excuse he had believed, all crumbled in a single exhale. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even confused. He understood. He had walked away from a life he didn't know had already begun. And now that life was standing in front of him, in tiny sandals, holding a toy seashell, looking up at him with the eyes he had given them, he couldn't reach out for them. He didn't have the right. So he did the only thing left for him to do. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her, and for the first time in years, his voice carried no pride, no certainty, no armor. "I didn't know," he said, and the words trembled. But beneath them, unspoken, lived a deeper truth. If he had known, everything would have been different. Amelia held his gaze, strong and unbroken. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she said softly, and in that moment, both their lives changed again. Not backward. Forward, into something neither of them understood yet. Chapter 5. Slow rebuilding. Not regret, but presence. He didn't leave the hotel that day. He couldn't. The world he had known just hours ago felt distant, unfamiliar, as if someone had quietly replaced it while he wasn't looking. He walked outside, needing air, but the ocean breeze did nothing to calm the storm inside him. His hands were shaking slightly, a detail he once would have fought to conceal, but now he didn't care who noticed. He leaned on the railing overlooking the water, watching the waves, trying to reassemble himself into something coherent. He had lost many things in life, deals, friendships, meaning, but nothing had hit him like this. The certainty that he had missed the first steps, the first words, the first time they had said "Mama." He felt it in his chest like something raw and open. He didn't deserve to grieve it, and yet the pain arrived anyway. He sat there until the sun, once bright and golden, softened into the gentle orange of sunset. He didn't know how long he was there. Time had stopped having boundaries. Finally, a tiny voice broke the fog. "Mommy says we shouldn't talk to strangers." He turned slowly. Lyra was standing a few feet away from him, her small hands clasped together, her posture cautious, but not afraid. Eleni hovered behind her, holding a seashell against her chest like a shield. They should have been laughing in a hotel pool, asking for ice cream, doing anything but confronting the quiet heartbreak of an adult world they didn't yet understand. Arthur knelt down so he didn't tower over them. His breath was unsteady as he spoke. "You're right. Your mommy is very wise." Lyra's eyes, his eyes, studied him intensely. That same quiet intelligence he'd always had, but never knew he could pass on. Eleni, braver in emotion than her sister, stepped closer. "Why were you sad?" she asked, her voice small and sincere. He swallowed hard. This moment required the kind of honesty he had always avoided. "Because I missed something very important," he said, choosing each word slowly, carefully. "I didn't know it was mine to miss. They didn't understand. Not fully. But children master emotional truths even before language catches up." Eleni came closer first, placing her tiny hand on top of his on the railing. It was a gesture so simple and so powerful that he had to duck his head for a moment, blinking back the tears he didn't want to shed in front of them. Amelia walked up a few moments later, moving in silence. She had given him space to see them, to truly see them, but had stayed close enough to intervene if anything felt overwhelming. Her presence was firm, grounded. She didn't rush. She didn't pull the girls away. She simply stood beside him and let the moment unfold. The four of them walked to the quiet garden terrace just outside the lobby. It was a small space with benches and flowering vines climbing up trellises. the kind of place designed for quiet conversations. The girls sat on the stone step, humming to themselves, swapping shells, and examining petals. Amelia and Arthur stood a few feet apart, not looking at each other at first. He spoke first, his voice low. "Warren, you didn't owe me anything. I know that now." She didn't answer right away. The breeze whispered in the leaves, and in that sound was the same unspoken sweetness she had once loved in him. "I didn't tell you," she said slowly, "because you had already chosen a life without us. I wasn't going to give you a responsibility out of obligation or guilt. These girls deserve love given freely, not love born of duty." He nodded, and the honesty of it hit him like a truth he should have always known. "I wasn't the man I should have been," he admitted. "I thought love should be simple, easy, something that didn't require depth." He let out a breath, shame flickering in his expression. "I was wrong." Amelia didn't soften, but she didn't harden either. "People change," she said. "Some because they want to, others because life forces them to." He let out a quiet, painful laugh. "I think life finally caught up with me." They stood in silence, not the sharp, awkward silence of fresh wounds, but the stillness of two people who had lived long enough to understand that some conversations aren't settled by a single exchange of words. "What happens now?" he asked. Not demanding, not assuming, just wanting. Amelia looked at the girls. Lyra was tracing patterns on the stone with a fallen flower petal. Eleni was trying to balance her seashell on her knee. They looked peaceful, safe, loved. "We go slow," she said. "You have to get to know them. They have to get to know you. No promises you can't keep. No rushing. No claiming." His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time in years, they held something soft, something open. "I'll earn it," he said quietly. "Not just their trust, yours too." Her heart didn't leap. It didn't break. It simply acknowledged him. Whatever they became, it wouldn't be built on apologies or regret. It would be built on presence, on patience, on choice. The sun dipped lower, bathing the garden in a warm light. The girls called to her, and Amelia walked toward them, her steps light, her hair catching the last glow of the evening. Arthur watched the three of them together, the life he had missed, but the life he might still step into. And for the first time in years, hope didn't scare him. It humbled him. It steadied him. And he knew with absolute clarity that the hardest part wasn't what he had already lost. It was what he was determined not to lose again. Audience interaction. Do you think Arthur is seeking redemption only for the girls or for Amelia too? Can he earn her trust back? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. Share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose the real thing. Chapter 6. Brick by brick. The new commitment. He began returning to the coastal village every weekend, at first with a quiet hesitation, as if afraid that if he moved too fast, the fragile balance might shatter. He no longer booked expensive suites or arrived in polished cars. Instead, he drove the long road in an old sedan he had recently bought, the engine steady and the drive quiet enough for him to think. He spent most of those drives in silence, reliving the years he had missed, trying not to drown in regret, but to learn to carry it without letting it control him. When he arrived, he never went directly to Amelia's door. He always walked to the beach first. Sometimes he found the girls already there, digging in the sand, or collecting shells in small baskets they had woven from dry reeds. He would approach slowly so they could see him coming, giving them the option to greet him or not. They always did. Eleni was the first. Always, her laughter bubbling up as she launched herself toward him without hesitation. Lyra followed more quietly, studying him with thoughtful eyes before sliding her tiny hand into his. The first time she did that, his throat tightened so hard, he had to look away. He learned to meet them where they were. He didn't overwhelm them with questions or affection. He sat in the sand and let them set the pace. They showed him their treasures, a smooth, heart-shaped stone, a tiny crab they found under a rock, spiral seashells of cream and pink. They talked in excited fragments, one voice overlapping the other, and he listened with an attention he had never paid to anyone in his business life. He discovered Lyra loved drawing patterns in the sand and could spend hours making intricate shapes only to watch the tide wash them away. He discovered Eleni loved building things, towers of pebbles, forts made of driftwood, anything her hands could mold. He didn't try to correct them or direct them. He simply joined them. Amelia watched sometimes from the porch or the path leading to the shore. She didn't stay close, but she kept close enough to intervene if necessary. She observed him the way one observes the weather, not to predict storms, but to understand the air. He was different now. The confidence was still there, but he no longer tried to fill every room. His silence was no longer sharp and cold. It was soft, contemplative. He had learned something she had learned long ago, that love is not loud. Love is a presence. One afternoon, rain started unexpectedly, the soft kind that came from warm clouds and made the world smell like salt and earth. Instead of rushing inside, the girls shrieked with laughter, leaping through shallow puddles that formed between the rocks. Arthur didn't stop them. He lifted his face to the rain and let it fall on him, blinking the water from his lashes as if it were cleansing instead of inconvenient. Amelia came out to the beach with umbrellas, but she paused when she saw the scene. The girls spinning and giggling, and Arthur kneeling down, his arms wide, letting Eleni leap into them as if she had been doing it all her life. Amelia lowered the umbrellas slowly, realizing they weren't needed. Later, after towels and hot soup and the soft quiet of night settled over the house, the girls were asleep, snuggled together in their shared bed. Amelia and Arthur sat on the porch, the air cool, the moonlight scattering silver on the ocean surface. "You changed," she said finally. Not accusing, not praising, just acknowledging. He let out a slow breath, folding his hands. "Life stripped me down. I thought I could control everything, including love. I was wrong." He didn't look at her right away, as if gathering the courage to do so. "I lost something that was real because I was afraid of anything that asked me for more than I was willing to give." She rested her arms on her knees, looking out at the water. "I wasn't easy," she said softly. "I know that." He shook his head. "You weren't complicated. You were deep, and I didn't know how to hold depth without drowning." Those words hung between them, almost luminous in their honesty. Amelia's chest tightened, not from pain, but from the recognition of a man who was no longer running from himself. The porch light flickered gently as a warm breeze passed. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Not because she needed reassurance, but because it was a truth they both had to walk through. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the sea where the waves rolled in a constant, patient rhythm. "I regret who I was," he said, "but I don't regret this moment, or where it led, or them. I don't regret them." His voice cracked slightly. "And I won't leave again." She closed her eyes briefly, letting those words settle. Not a promise, a quietly made commitment, without demand. The night held them in a gentle, firm embrace. They weren't lovers again. They weren't strangers anymore. They were something in between, a place where healing begins not with falling for each other, but with standing up, side by side. Chapter 7. The Foundation of Choice. A New Love. He didn't try to crash back into Amelia's life. He didn't ask to stay overnight. He didn't try to reclaim a spot that was no longer his. Instead, he built his presence slowly, brick by brick, as if building a home from the foundation up. The girls came to expect him on weekends, then on weeknights when work allowed. He learned the rhythm of the village, the way the light changed over the water in the late afternoon, the names of the shopkeepers, the way children's laughter sounded different in a place where the ocean softened every sound. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was someone learning to belong. Lyra began to bring him her small notebooks filled with scribbles, stars, leaves, shapes that only made sense to her. She would sit next to him on the porch swing and draw in silence while he read, their silence warm and companionable. Eleni, on the other hand, insisted he help her build elaborate structures out of blocks and driftwood, creating towers that leaned precariously until they tumbled over, sending her into bursts of wild laughter. He learned to laugh with her, to really laugh, in a way that felt like something inside him was finally unclenching after years of being too tight. Nights often ended with all four of them on the beach as the sun dipped gently into the sea. Lyra collected shells with the care of someone handling something sacred. Eleni chased the tide until it pushed her back, and Amelia watched them with a softness that had grown stronger instead of weaker. Arthur sometimes stood beside her without speaking. There was peace in those moments, an understanding that not everything needed to be discussed right away. Something just needed to live in the stillness between breaths. Healing is rarely smooth. One afternoon, Lyra refused to take his hand. She stood staring at him, her small face crumpled with confusion, as if recalling something unspoken. Amelia watched from a few feet away, understanding what was happening before either of them spoke. "Mama," Lyra asked later, her voice barely a whisper as she sat beside Amelia in bed. "If he's here now, why wasn't he here before?" Amelia felt something twist in her chest, not pain, but the fragile ache of holding truth in hands that had to be gentle. She didn't speak ill of him. She never had. Children deserve a story free of bitterness. "He didn't know about you then," Amelia said softly, pushing Lyra's hair from her forehead. "And sometimes grown-ups don't understand what is important until later. But he knows now, and he's trying." Lyra absorbed this in silence, the way she absorbed everything. The next day, she put her hand in Arthur's unbidden. He didn't comment. He simply held it, carefully, like something precious. There was another moment, not loud, but deeply meaningful. Eleni, who was always bold and bright, tripped running along the shore and scraped her knee. She burst into tears, stunned more by the pain of the surprise than the wound itself. Instinctively, she reached not for Amelia, but for Arthur. He lifted her gently, holding her close, letting her bury her face in his shoulder. Amelia watched them, her arms half raised before slowly lowering them. Eleni shuddered in his arms for a long minute before the sobs faded to sniffles. When she finally pulled back, her small hand clutching his shirt, she whispered, "Don't go away." His breath hitched. He didn't promise. He didn't swear. He just said, very quietly, "I won't." Trust was being built not through speeches, but through moments like these. As the weeks turned into months, the village began to treat him not as a fleeting newcomer, but as someone returning to himself. Neighbors who had once watched him with cautious curiosity now nodded to him at the market, spoke to him at the bakery, and accepted the way he carried Eleni on his hip or walked hand in hand with Lyra. But the deepest change happened between him and Amelia. Their conversations grew deeper, not about the past. It would always be there, but it no longer held power over them in the same way. They talked about the present, about the garden Amelia wanted to plant, about the girls' new favorite songs, about the slow, steady unfolding of the life they were building. And they talked about the future, not in grand declarations, but in shared glances, in simple actions. In the quiet way they began to move around space with an awareness of each other. One evening, while the girls slept and the house was wrapped in a soft lamplight, Amelia and Arthur sat on the sofa, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of the other's presence. The low hum of the ocean filled the silence. "I don't want what we had," she said quietly, surprised by how sure the words felt. "That was built on things we didn't understand yet." He turned to her, his expression steady. "I don't want that either." She held his gaze, quiet and unprotected. "If there is anything now, it has to be new, made slowly, made differently." He nodded once, a quiet promise. "Slow," he repeated. There was no rush. There was no attempt to reclaim an old love. Just two people learning to love each other for the first time, without fear. When winter arrived, the village transformed. The sea remained restless, but the wind softened, bringing the scent of pine instead of salt. Lights appeared in the windows early each night, flickering warmly against the cool blue twilight. The bookshop hung wreaths along its doorframe, and the cafe served hot chocolate with cinnamon. The world didn't slow down, but it felt gentler, as if it understood that some stories need soft edges on their ending. Arthur had rented a small house a short walk from Amelia's. It wasn't a grand house, not a statement of wealth or success, just a place with wide windows, creaking floors, and a porch overlooking the sea. He chose it because he wanted to be near, but not intrusive. Close enough for the girls to run to him. Far enough that nothing felt forced. The first night he slept there, alone, he stayed awake for a long time, not from loneliness, but from a strange, deep sense of arrival. The building of their life together was slow and deliberate. He learned to braid Eleni's hair, badly at first, until she laughed at the crooked plait and insisted he try again. He learned Lyra liked to be held in silence when she was overwhelmed, her tiny hand clutching the fabric of his shirt until her breathing evened out. He learned the shape of their laughter, the tears that came from tiredness instead of sadness, and the way their minds worked. One all intuition and brightness, the other deep water and quiet thought. Sometimes the girls would wake before dawn and snuggle into his bed, their heads resting against his chest as the sun peeped over the sky. Those mornings were the ones he treasured most, because the love there was simple, natural, unstrained. He didn't have to earn it through perfection. He only had to show up. For Amelia, trust came like the tide, never all at once. She had carried the world alone for years, and letting anyone back into that space took more courage than any heartbreak. Yet she found herself turning to him more often, not to depend on him, but to share the weight. He fixed the fence when the winter storms loosened the planks. He took the girls to the library on rainy days, letting them choose stacks of books taller than themselves. He helped cook dinner, learning slowly and laughing when Eleni insisted too much salt was required, to make it magical. One evening, near the end of winter, the four of them walked the beach. The tide was low, and bits of sea glass glittered on the sand like tiny hidden treasures. Eleni ran ahead, her laughter echoing down the shore, while Lyra walked between her parents, holding both their hands. The sky was streaked with lavender and pink, the sun sinking low and slow. Amelia looked at Arthur and realized how different he looked. Not older, not worn, but softened. The sharpness that had once defined him had melted into something steady, quiet, safe. He no longer carried the need to prove anything. The man he had become was someone new, someone she could get to know, rather than remember. He stopped walking, looking at the water. The sound of the waves filled the pause. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, not trembling, not unsure. I don't want to go too fast. I don't want to interrupt what we've built. But I want to say something I've been holding on to for a while." He turned to her fully, his gaze open, steady. "I love the life we have now. I love them. And I love you. Not the memory of you. Not the idea of you. You. Just as you are now." She didn't speak right away, because the words didn't require an immediate answer. They weren't a question. They were a truth placed gently in her hands. Lyra squeezed their hands tighter, and Eleni turned back to them, waving wildly before running back to join them. The four of them stood together, enveloped in the slow fading of daylight. Amelia felt something inside her settle. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. A peace earned, not given. She leaned into him, not as a promise of forever, but as a beginning, made of choice rather than circumstance. He held her, carefully and surely, and the girls pressed close to their sides. The waves rolled on, constant and endless. No grand statements were needed. No applause was required. Just four hearts learning to beat at the same rhythm. Love, real love, hadn't arrived in a flash of lightning or a fire. It had arrived in silence, by staying, by showing up, by starting over. And that was enough.